The dense wilderness stretched endlessly, a realm untouched by time, where towering trees whispered secrets to the wind and the undergrowth teemed with unseen life. Hugo had spent years patrolling these woods, his boots pressing familiar paths into the soil, his senses attuned to every rustle, every shift in the symphony of nature. But today, something was different. A strange sound sliced through the usual hum of the forest, a low, guttural cry, raw with agony. It was not the call of a bird or the distant growl of a predator. It was something else, something suffering. Hugo's pulse quickened. He froze, his ears straining. The sound came again, weaker this time, carried by the breeze like a ghostly plea. He moved cautiously, his instincts sharpened by years of navigating the unpredictable wild. Pushing through the thick foliage, he followed the sound, his every step muffled by the damp earth beneath. Then he saw it. A massive gray bear, its body tense with distress, was trapped. A cruel steel contraption clamped around its front paw, the jagged metal biting deep into flesh. Blood seeped into the dirt beneath it, forming dark stains against the forest floor. Its breaths came in heavy, ragged gasps, nostrils flaring in pain. Hugo's chest tightened. The bear's eyes locked onto his, a mixture of fear, desperation, and something unexpected. It wasn't just an animal fighting for survival. It was a creature pleading for help. For a moment, time stood still. The forest seemed to hold its breath. Hugo's fingers instinctively hovered near the knife at his belt. One wrong move, and he would be its next victim. Yet, walking away was never an option. Hugo's breath came in shallow, measured inhales as he stared at the wounded bear. Every instinct in his body screamed at him to back away, to retreat before the animal lashed out in fear and agony. He knew too well that a cornered beast was the most dangerous kind. And this bear, with its massive frame and raw suffering, was beyond desperate. One wrong move, and he could be reduced to nothing more than a memory swallowed by the forest. Yet, he couldn't leave it like this. His fingers trembled as he reached into his pack, pulling out a pry bar. The bear let out a low growl, its muscles twitching as if bracing for an attack. Hugo hesitated. He needed to make it understand. He was not the enemy. Slowly, carefully, he crouched, keeping his gaze low and his movements deliberate. "Easy, boy," he murmured, his voice barely above a whisper, laced with the steady calmness of someone who had spent years speaking to the wild. "I'm here to help." The bear's deep, labored breaths filled the tense silence between them. Hugo knew that if it lunged, there would be no time to react. He forced himself to ignore the fear clawing at his chest and instead focused on the trap. A wicked contraption of rusted steel, its jagged teeth buried deep in flesh. With a slow, deliberate motion, he wedged the pry bar into the mechanism and pushed. The metal groaned in protest. The bear flinched violently, a sharp, guttural snarl tearing from its throat. Hugo froze, his heart pounded. Then click. The trap loosened just enough. The bear yanked its paw free, stumbling back, its wild eyes locked onto him. For one breathless moment, neither moved. And then, the bear turned, free at last, disappearing into the forest. The forest had always been Hugo's sanctuary, a place of quiet solitude where every rustling leaf and distant howl was familiar. But something had changed. A presence lingered in the shadows, unseen yet undeniable. It started subtly, an occasional stirring in the undergrowth, a fleeting movement just beyond his line of sight. At first, he dismissed it as paranoia, a lingering remnant of the tense encounter with the bear. But the feeling didn't fade. One evening, as he knelt by a stream filling his canteen, the hairs on the back of his neck prickled. The air felt heavier, charged with an unspoken energy. Slowly, he lifted his head, his pulse quickening. Across the water, half hidden by dense foliage, it stood there. The bear. It wasn't snarling, wasn't charging. It simply watched him, dark eyes reflecting the glow of the setting sun. A shiver ran down his spine. Why was it here? Had it been following him all this time? His muscles tensed, instinct screaming at him to be cautious. Yet, there was no malice in the bear's gaze, only something eerily close to recognition. They held the moment between them, man and beast, bound by an invisible thread neither could fully comprehend. Then, as suddenly as it had appeared, the bear turned, its massive form melting into the trees without a sound. Hugo exhaled, realizing he had been holding his breath. He should have felt relief, but instead, a strange unease settled in his bones. This wasn't just a chance encounter. Somewhere, out there in the vast untamed wilderness, the bear was watching, waiting. Hugo moved through the forest with a quiet urgency, his boots pressing into the damp earth. Something was wrong. The air felt different, tainted. It wasn't the usual symphony of the wild that filled his ears, but a heavy, unnatural silence. Then he saw them. Rusty steel traps lined in cruel precision, their jaws open wide, waiting for unsuspecting victims. His stomach churned. Poachers. Kneeling, he examined one of the devices. It was freshly set, meaning they weren't far. His fingers brushed the jagged metal, anger boiling beneath his skin. He had spent years protecting these lands, fighting for creatures who had no voice. Yet here was another reminder of the relentless cruelty of man. A sound, muffled voices. He froze, muscles tightening. They were close. Moving swiftly, Hugo ducked behind a fallen tree, his breath steady but his heart pounding. Through the dense foliage, he spotted them. 3 men, rifles slung casually over their shoulders, their eyes scanning the underbrush. They laughed, a cruel, hollow sound that grated against the forest's stillness. Hugo clenched his fists. He had no weapon, no backup. Confronting them directly would be suicide. But then, a low, menacing growl cut through the air. From the shadows, the bear emerged. The poachers froze. One fumbled with his rifle, but the sheer force of the bear's presence stole the confidence from their faces. It wasn't just any bear, it was the bear. Hugo watched, barely breathing, as the men scrambled backward, panic overriding their bravado. And just like that, they ran, vanishing into the trees. The bear stood motionless for a moment, then turned its head, its eyes meeting Hugo's as if it knew. A thick column of smoke twisted into the sky, staining the horizon with an ominous shade of gray. The acrid scent of burning wood filled the air, stinging Hugo's nostrils as he pushed forward through the dense underbrush. His heartbeat pounded in his ears, blending with the distant roar of an encroaching wildfire. The forest was in chaos. Flames slithered up the trunks of ancient trees, their bark splitting with sharp, violent cracks. Ash and embers rained down like a deathly snowfall, painting the world in hues of orange and red. Hugo coughed against the choking smoke, his instincts screaming at him to retreat, to get out while he still could. But then he saw it. A massive silhouette staggered through the thick haze, its fur matted with soot, its steps sluggish and unsteady. The bear. Hugo's stomach twisted. The fire had trapped it. "Come on, move!" he called out, his voice hoarse and nearly lost in the inferno's deafening chorus. The bear hesitated, its dark eyes reflecting both fear and exhaustion. It turned the wrong way, deeper into the fire's grip. "No, not that way." Hugo sprinted toward it, ignoring the searing heat pressing against his skin. He waved his arms, trying to catch the bear's attention, his mind racing. Would it recognize him? Would it trust him? The bear paused. Its nostrils flared, its massive frame swaying from fatigue. Then, as if something clicked, it stepped toward him. Relief surged through Hugo, but they weren't safe yet. Flames snapped at their heels, licking greedily at the dry underbrush. Hugo led the way, dodging falling branches and navigating through gaps in the inferno. The fire was merciless, devouring everything in its path. Every breath burned, every step was a battle against suffocating heat. The bear stumbled. Hugo turned just in time to see it falter, its strength fading. Without thinking, he lunged, grabbing a soaked cloth from his pack and pressing it against its nose. "Stay with me," he murmured, his voice tight with desperation. One last push. With fire closing in from all sides, Hugo spotted an opening, a clearing just beyond a smoldering log. Summoning every last ounce of strength, he led the bear toward it. Then they were through. The moment they crossed into safety, Hugo collapsed onto the grass, his chest heaving. The bear stood nearby, its breaths ragged, but it was alive. For a long moment, neither moved. The forest burned behind them, but they hadn't survived. The forest had begun to heal. The scars of the fire were still visible, blackened trunks, patches of scorched earth, but nature was resilient. Green shoots pushed through the ash, a quiet testament to survival. Hugo watched as life slowly returned, yet he knew one chapter was about to close. The bear had recovered. For weeks it had lingered near his camp, appearing at the tree line, watching him with quiet familiarity. There was no fear, no aggression, just an unspoken understanding. But Hugo knew it couldn't stay. The wild was calling it back. One crisp morning, As mist curled around the treetops, Hugo set out on his usual patrol. The air was still, the sky streaked with the pale gold of dawn. He hadn't expected to see it, but there it was. The bear stood on a ridge overlooking the valley, its massive form silhouetted against the rising sun. It turned its head, locking eyes with him across the distance. For a long moment, neither moved. Hugo's chest tightened. This was it. The bear shifted, stepping forward slightly before pausing. A silent hesitation, as if it too understood that this was a farewell. Hugo swallowed the lump in his throat. "Go on," he said softly, though he knew the bear didn't need permission. "This is where you belong." The bear held his gaze for another heartbeat. Then, slowly, deliberately, it turned away. It walked forward, its heavy paws pressing into the damp earth, moving deeper into the forest. Hugo watched as it disappeared between the towering trees, its form swallowed by shadows and sunlight. He exhaled a deep, steadying breath. The space where the bear had stood felt strangely empty. It was gone. Not lost. Not taken. Free. A breeze rustled through the trees, carrying the distant cry of a bird overhead. The forest had always been a place of beginnings and endings, of untamed beauty and quiet goodbyes. Hugo had spent his life protecting it, yet this moment, the release of something he had fought so hard to save, felt more profound than anything he had ever done. He turned, walking back toward camp, knowing that somewhere out there, the bear was roaming beneath the same sky. And that was enough. Hugo's journey with the bear was more than just an extraordinary encounter. It was a testament to the fragile yet profound connection between humans and the wild. In saving the bear, he did not tame it, nor did he claim ownership over it. Instead, he offered it a chance to survive, to heal, to be free. And in return, the bear unknowingly changed him, teaching him the silent language of trust, respect, and coexistence. Nature does not belong to us. We belong to it. Yet, time and again, we take more than we give, leaving scars on landscapes and lives we barely understand. But Hugo's story reminds us that small acts of compassion can ripple through the world in ways we never expect. The bear was not a threat, nor was it an enemy. It was simply another life fighting to exist. And like all creatures of the wild, it deserved protection, not fear. If we choose to see the world through eyes of empathy, rather than dominance, we might find ourselves not just as protectors of nature, but as a part of it. The question is, will we choose to listen before it's too late?